Welcome to the Literature Lounge, where writers and authors share their stories behind their stories. Hi, today's episode we have with us Eika Chaturvedi Bannerjee, who's the founder of Ekam Resonance, a purpose-driven organization that blends modern management practices with ancient wisdom to solve contemporary issues. Wow, that was a very long sentence. With over 2 decades of corporate experience, including roles in global private wealth banking, and as the CEO of Future Sharp Skills, she is a leading corporate mythologist. Yes, you heard me right, corporate mythologist in India, and a Chevening Gurukul Fellow from the University of Oxford. Eka is the best selling author of 2 books, 52 Red Pills and Panchkanya, Puranik Katha, Akhyan. She is deeply immersed in age-old Indian wisdom and the founder curator of Akhyan, India's first ever annual mythology festival. So, welcome to today's episode. So, could you just tell us a little bit about what led you to write the book?
So, Mama, thank you for having me over, and it's wonderful to see you again. It's always a pleasure engaging and interacting with you, and I miss our conversations. So, thank you so much for having me here on the Mawa Chinappa show. Um, so, so I am on what I call my third life, Mawa. I've been a banker for 1 decade of my working. For the second decade of my working, I was the CEO. And now in my third life, I am engaged in the pursuit of my passion with purpose. And so we run Ekam Resonance. Ekam is, as we call, the wisdom organization from India for the world. And a large part. So what we do with our organization, Mawa, is really um spread the concept, the knowledge, and the wisdom of all our ancient texts. So we truly believe that if our civilization has existed for more than 5,000 years of documented history and more than 10,000 years of undocumented history, they must have cracked some survival hacks. They must have got something right. And so we believe that instead for all the questions that face us today in our contemporary, modern, everyday living, sometimes it makes more sense to dive deep, go within. Tuck your tail between your leg and your head between your knees and go within rather than run around like headless chicken. So, what we do at Ekam is put that wisdom out there, contextualize it, contemporize it, make it relevant to today, and put it out there to say this is an alternative narrative to that which we've been raised on in our schooling and in our education. So one of these narratives, by the way, is also the narrative of feminism, the voice of the woman.
Absolutely. I was coming to that as the next question.
So that was what the inspiration was to. In fact, we have another book that's coming up in later this year, called Goddess in the Boardroom. So these are expressions, and obviously the cause of the woman and the voice of feminism and the feminine divinity is very, very close to my heart. So these are just our experiments, our learnings, our experiences, our effort, our yagya at putting out the voice of feminism out there, the Indian voice.
How amazing. So, what was the inspiration behind choosing the 5 epic women of Ahalya, Tara, Mandodari, Kunti, and Draupadi? All of them so layered. So, how did you make them the central characters of your book?
So the Panchakanya shloka, Mawa, is a very well-known shloka. What's interesting is that this shloka, Panchakanya, Ahalya, Tara, Draupadi, Kunti, Mandodari, Tatha, Panchakanya Smaranaya Nityam, Mahapataka Nashaka. So the interesting bit is that we find no source of this shloka, and yet it exists in our collective blood memories. It's a part of our wedding rituals. It's a part of our everyday conversation. It's a shloka that's very well known. So it's been ritualized, and in true oral tradition, it's been transmitted, transferred, and passed on. Uh, but it has no epic origin. Right. So when we look at these 5 women, Ahalya, Tara, Draupadi, Kunti, Mandodari, like you rightly said, very, very deeply led, um, strong, independent characters across both the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So Ahalya, Tara, and Mandodari are from the Ramayana, and Draupadi and Kunti, of course, we know are from the Mahabharata. They are called the Kanyas. They are called the Panchakanya. Now, Kanya traditionally is the word for an innocent virgin. Now, what's interesting is that all 5 of these women are not only not virgins, They have all been married and very strong women in their own right, and they have all known more than one relationship. And yet the fact that they call them the Panchakanya was the point of intrigue. Now, depending on how you interpret the shloka can either mean that remember and beware the name of these five women, and remember if you're like them, तो कितना बड़ा बड़ा पातका होता है, मतलब नाश होता है. Or depending on where you read the A ki matra. Now remember, it's been transmitted orally, so you don't know whether it's Mahapataka Nashakam or whether it is Mahapatak Anashakam. Right. So if you and if you change that Aki Matra, then it could also mean that remembering the names of these five women will save you from Mahavinash. Right. So that little bit of intrigue, the fact that they are called the Kanyas and yet they have layers, the fact that they are known to be innocent when in fact they have all known more than one man, more than one relationship, was actually that intriguing point of challenge. And more importantly, it's a book that's co-authored between my mother and me. So there
Oh,
was also
wonderful.
an intergenerational perspective. My mother and I, we've been talking about the Panchakanya forever, for almost 10, 12 years. And every time that we would have this conversation, we would also have a debate. So I think that intergenerational difference in our points of view also inspired us to put these stories out there, to say that maybe this is a far more layered, far more representative version of the feminine voice than actually it reflects India and Indian wisdom really well.
So, how do you think the stories of these women can be related to the current conversations on women empowerment?
Oh, I love that question, Moa. So each of these stories, and I find it so fascinating that, and in fact, one of the 3 points of view that we want to put out as we write these stories or make them come in the public view. These stories are already written. We're just aggregating and retelling them. Uh, is actually this perspective where while they look like ancient stories and ancient themes, they're actually very contemporary themes. So if you look at Ahalya's theme is of withdrawal of engagement of senses with the world, turning to stone, right? That's a contemporary theme. It's a human theme. It's not an ancient or modern theme. The theme of Tara, which is the theme of fluidity between Bali and Sugriva, right? The theme of Ahalya's fidelity is a contemporary theme. Draupadi is all rage. Kunti's theme is that of proprietary and, log kya kahenge. And Mandodari's theme is of power and position. I will be the undisputed queen. Now, when you see these themes, they're actually timeless themes. They're ancient stories, but they're timeless themes. Similarly, similarly, Mawa, these themes sound like they've been told from the female voice, but they're actually gender agnostic. The themes of fidelity, fluidity, withdrawal of senses, power, proprietary, rage, these are genderless themes. They could have been male stories as much as female stories. They're human.
Absolutely.
They're timeless. They're human. And third and most important, while we see these themes as being about abla nari, about being social injustice, or kitna atyachar hua hai about the woman, the very fact that they're called Kanya is because they haven't been violated. Right? So these are all women who've made their choices and lived with the consequences of their choices.
What an important line, to make the choices and live with the consequences of their own choices. I need to repeat this, for our listeners, because I think this is a space where a lot of us often get confused. To live with the consequences of the choices that you make isn't going to be easy, but eventually it is always a lot of enlightenment at the end. Yes. So, why did you write in Hindi?
Very good question, Mawa. So, my mother, by the way, she's actually a Sahityakara. So, Amma actually has some other books that she's written as well, some short story collections, some poetry collections. We also realized that there is a fair amount of Panchakanya literature in English that exists. But a lot of these are stories, like I said, they've been present in our ritual and our folk, and we hear of it in bits and pieces. We actually have written these stories for the Bharatiya audience. For and Hindi is the medium of the masses. It's a language that's very well heard, very well understood, very well spoken in, also closer to Sanskrit. So sometimes we find that our expressions in Hindi are much more representative than they are in English. So therefore Hindi, so that it reaches the masses, so that it is of us, for us, and by us. And so that this is just the aggregation of all the Puranic Katha. That's why it's called the Puranic Katha Akhyan, because we've brought together all the different stories. So Ahalya exists in the Rig Veda, in Valmiki, in Manas, in a lot of Puranic literature. We've just put all the stories together and allowed our readers to make their own decisions and judgments on the stories.
So these stories are quite known with people who have read mythology, and mythology in Indian homes. Most of us are always read to by our grandmothers, mothers. So all these names are quite familiar for a lot of us. But obviously, you've drawn a very parallel perspective to this whole thing. So can you just share a few insights, that your book would provide for any of our listeners right now who's listening and they're going to pick up the book?
So the popular story of Ahalya, and let's take Ahalya, she's my favorite character actually. She's also the first woman ever to have been created and the most beautiful woman. So Ahalya's story, as we know popularly, is that Ahalya was created by Brahma. She was handed over to sage Gautam for bringing up, for raising. So Sage Gautam took her home. He raised her as a daughter. When she attained puberty, he brought her back to Brahma and he said, "Okay, here, my job is done. I've raised her and raised her well." So Brahma says, "Well done, and I'm pleased with how you've raised her as a daughter. I hereby gift her to you as your wife." Okay, so Gautam says, "Okay, cool, I'm fine with it." And he and Ahalya go ahead and they raise a whole family together. They run an ashram together. Meanwhile, our friend Indra is very upset. He's very upset about the fact that this most beautiful, exquisite creation of Brahma should have been his by right, should have belonged to him by right, but here she is living with this old sage. So much later, by which time Ahalya's family has been raised, son is old, etc., etc., Indra comes to Ahalya. Now, bare bones of the story, the skeleton of the story is that Indra comes to Ahalya. Depending on which text we have been raised on, the versions of what happened between Indra and Ahalya vary, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But they consummate their relationship. Gautam comes back, Gautam finds out. This is universal. Again, depending on which version of which text you've read, the curse, Gautam's reaction to the story is very different. So the curse that Indra has put on, the curse that Ahalya has put on differs. And again, which text you have, the version is that, of course, she turns to stone and then is redeemed by Bhagwan Sri Ram. This is the bare bones skeleton. Right? So all of us know the story. Now, like I said, depending on which version we read. So if you read the Rig Veda version, the Rig Veda version has, so Ahalya was the first woman. She was the first woman in creation. There is in the Rig Veda, and it predates Sri Ram. There's no context of Ram in Rig Veda. There is this glorious seduction scene between Indra and Ahalya, where Indra comes and Indra actually seduces Ahalya and says, there's things like, "Oh, slim waisted one, I must have you," and desire. And there's a complete male female conversation that happens there. And in this, Ahalya is seduced. Ahalya is seduced and very willingly she submits and surrenders to Indra. Gautam comes back, Gautam finds out. Ahalya tells Gautam in the Rig Veda. She says, "You know what, with you in all these years of our married life, you have fulfilled me as a daughter. You have fulfilled me as a wife and as a mother. But today I have known fulfillment as a woman. And having thus been fulfilled, I am so tripta. I am so complete. I am so fulfilled that I have no further desire for any sensorial engagement with the world. मुझे और कुछ experience नहीं करना. And therefore I withdraw my senses from the world. Pratyahara. And I will become stone. Stone, unfeeling, Shila. And she says, I have no further desire of engagement. And she turns herself to stone. That's the Rigveda version. But that version we aren't taught. By the time you've reached Valmiki, because the social order has changed and this narrative needs to have a very different perspective, by the time you reach Valmiki, you're actually studying about how Indra deceived Ahalya. Indra came to Ahalya in the guise of Gautam and took her. And for that, Gautam cursed Indra to become a cat and cursed Ahalya to become the stone to be redeemed by Bhagwan Shri Ram. That was the Valmiki version. And then if you go further down and read other versions of the Ramayana, the Puranic Akhyan, this has become even cruder. Because by now, the social order is about the wife being the man's property. And so that violation must be punished. So by the time we reach that version, Indra has raped Ahalya. And therefore, for that, Gautam has cursed Indra with 1,000 vulva on his body. And Ahalya's cursed to be stone, to be redeemed by Ram, etc. Right? So, what we have wanted to bring out is all these stories together. Is the idea that there are always multiple variations of that one story, because the story we hear comes to us in a context. It has a perspective, and there's somebody who's trying to drive home a message to us with that story. So, all that my mother and I have attempted is actually put together all these stories and leave the judgment to
Amazing, amazing. What was the most challenging part of writing Panchkanya?
you. I think so. And this is a confession here, Mawa. The fact that my mother and I have very different perspectives. So arriving at the tone of the narrative, the language was of course all my mother's. So I did all the research so that there's consistency in language. So I did all the research. I wrote in English. She translated and put it out in Hindi. I think the biggest challenge was getting our perspectives aligned. So you find when you read the book that sometimes you'll find no perspective at all, because we choose to just narrate the stories and leave it to your judgment. And sometimes you'll find either only her perspective, usually only her perspective because she wrote, or sometimes you'll find both our perspectives in there. So I think that the challenging part was not the research and the stories, because both Amma and I do a lot of research. We read a lot of texts. We are both very strong women in our own rights. So I think getting those together was really the tough one, in writing this book.
So tell us a bit about your journey in the corporate world and what led you to establish Ecom Resonance.
So as I said, Mawa, I think I am on what I call my third life. Right? I discovered when I was 13, I discovered I was a healer and did what a 13-year-old does, which is become angry and resentful and not deal with it and push it away. Um, The first decade of corporate existence, therefore, Moa, was following the narrative. It was it was about proving a point to the world. It was about rising high in the corporate hierarchy. It was about, kare chalo, lade chalo, vande matram. I'm going to prove you right and wrong, and it's a battle, and it's a fight to be won. Um, but all this while, it was a very angry young woman in that journey. Um, I think life finally caught up with me it's about 10, 12, 14 years ago is when I went back to ancient wisdom. So mythologist is in fact, I'm very deeply uncomfortable with the word mythology, but that's how the world understands it best. But it's more about wisdom. It's about embracing your own self. It's about our texts and our scriptures. So I started that journey, but I wasn't sure, Mawa, of the articulation of that journey. Matlab, at that point of time, I'm talking about 12, 14 years ago, if you consumed ancient wisdom, you consumed it either as soul searching and hocus pocus and, very gray and amorphous, or you consumed it in the form of bhakti and religion, right? There was no, whereas it's not either, both of these are exotic alternatives. It's not mainstream way of life. And I think that is what my quest with ancient wisdom has been. Having said that, it took another decade to find its articulation. That second decade was the decade of seeking and surrender. That was the decade. And again, I was very blessed to have been offered this job that I was doing at Future Group, the role that I was offered. I actually made the first CEO of my MBAB school batch. But that happened only, Mawa, when I stopped chasing, right? For the first decade that I'd spent chasing. This was in surrender, allowing the universe to act while I figured out the articulation of this purpose that I was on. That took another decade. So it was about 5 years ago when I was doing my fellowship at the Oxford University, the Chevening Gurukul Fellowship. I think it was one of those nights where this transition from the third life happened, and I found that purpose. It was that pause, those 3 months away from work, family, focusing on the academic environment, allowed me to find the articulation. Once I found the articulation of income, I came back to India. I mean, I came back otherwise also. It still took me another 2 years to sort of exit the corporate world. There were loops to be closed in the CEO role that I was doing and tied up and handed over. So it took another 2 years, but by then the purpose was clear about ACOM being the wisdom organization from India for the world.
How amazing, my God, really, Eka. It's wonderful. I have to ask you the meaning of your name also.
Eka. So I am a Chaturvedi by birth. We're from UP. And Eka is the first name of Goddess Durga. It's Adi Shakti at the time of conception. So in fact, I remember when my parents were, and I'm now a Banerjee by marriage. So I married into the Bengalis. And I remember when my parents were protesting about my marriage, 25 years ago, to a Bengali household. I said, with this face, this name, really, who else will I marry but a Bengali? So I'm actually very privileged. I feel very, very privileged both to be born to this name, this family, this clan, and to be married into the family that has taken me in, and to be living out the power of, truly the power of Shakti and of Durga and of Eka.
Wonderful. My goodness, really, really. I mean, I'm sure our listeners are going to be so interested into delving deeper now. I am already. And, these stories that I've heard, but it's just now, I think, exactly like we all have our phases in which we start returning back to our roots. And you do find wisdom, in the Vedanta or all the other ancient, roots of where we come from. So, what resources or steps would you recommend, for some of our listeners who are probably not totally acquainted, but they would like to really delve into this subject further?
However tempted my corporate training is on this to say, follow Eka, follow Ekam, you will find your answers eventually. But so the one course that I'm very grateful for, and I think it's available, it's a resource out there for all of us, is the course that I did, which was my so it's now a master's course. It used to then be a postgraduate diploma course, and then an advanced postgraduate diploma course. Now it's a master's course from the Department of Sanskrit, Mumbai University. They have courses in Sanskrit, they have courses in mythology, they have courses in Yoga Shastra. These are all master's courses. So you need to study. See, all our wisdom, and in fact, both the Bhagavad Gita as well as Patanjali Yoga Sutras very clearly put it that the method of learning is three methods of learning. So you need to do tapa, you need to do swadhyay, and you need to do nimishasasan, which is self-reflection. So tapa is the place where you will go, you will read, you will study, and there is enough text and literature that exists, especially in the last 20 years. So find your texts, find your gurus, find the people, seek it. It will not walk into your life by itself. You have to seek. After seeking it, do the swadhyay. Swadhyay is self-practice on it. You don't have a choice. So you have to study it, hear, study, process. Once you've done that, then it's time for self-practice. And then the the process of introspection, the process of seeing how is it changing you, the process of awareness, the process of stepping into your own self. Mawa, you've done this journey very unconsciously. but that's the journey you've been on as you've stepped into your purpose and your passion. And everything else that we pick up from the texts, from the scriptures, from the literature, the value of it happens only when it has been assimilated, internalized, and it has become, when you can't separate the learning from its application.
For
It's almost
sure.
like food ना
Yeah,
महुआ जब हम खाना खाते हैं,
absolutely.
that खाने का protein or nourishment becomes relevant only after that food
Yeah,
been
has entered your system.
eaten, assimilated, and
Yeah,
become part of your bloodstream. Exactly.
absolutely. My God, you're a great speaker. And I think this has been the most amazing and riveting conversation because for me, also, I'm exactly at that journey where I'm searching for myself and seeking, as you said, seeking every day to learn a lot more about where I come from. What is it that ticks for me? And I think so many of our listeners are also really sailing on the same boat. So thank you so much for taking all the time today and being on the podcast. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I've had great fun.